Okay, awesome.
Just checking, you can hear me?
We can hear you.
Council Chris, you're live.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, it sounds like we're ready to go. It's 11 o'clock, so I'll call this workshop meeting to order at exactly 11 a.m. Look at us right on time. I'd like to start off the meeting by acknowledging that the City of Maple Ridge carries out its business on the unceded traditional territories of the Katzie First Nation and the Kwantlen First Nation. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Councillor Schiller, seconded by Councillor Youssef. All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Okay, can I get a motion to approve the minutes of February 27th and March 5th? Moved by Councillor Youssef, seconded by Councillor Doze. Any errors or omissions on those minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, carried. Right, okay, so now we're moving on to 5.1, which is the accessibility and inclusiveness strategy. I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Richmond, or where am I going?
Hi.
There you go, hello.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So I have the phenomenal team with me today, so you probably already know everybody. So Petra is Recreation Access Coordinator, and then Tony, Recreation or Community Recreation Manager. Petra is going to lead the presentation today, so I'll just let her get to her business.
Thank you to the Mayor and Council for the opportunity to present today. So Mackey facilitated a year-long engagement process within the community, inviting feedback from residents, community agencies, and staff regarding the city's accessibility and inclusiveness, with a vision of creating an accessible, inclusive community by removing barriers that impede community participation and creating accessible built environments and programming that is welcoming to all. So why are we doing this work? Because we care about the people that we're serving, to ensure that we are an accessible and inclusive community, and to ensure that we're meeting the requirements of the Accessible BC Act. The Accessible BC Act came into law in June of 2021 and works towards improving opportunities for persons with disabilities and to ensure their involvement in identifying, removing, and preventing barriers that can impede their full participation in all aspects of community life. Within the Accessible BC Act are 6 principles that must be considered in the development of the strategy. And these 6 principles are inclusion, adaptability, diversity, collaboration, self-determination, and universal design. In the creation of the strategy, the 6 principles listed above were not only considered, but also incorporated throughout. In addition to the principles identified in the Accessible BC Act, the working group identified 6 city-specific principles, which include diversibility, inclusion, accessibility, diversity, collaboration, and equity. As we continue to build our inclusive community, we need to move away from the assumption that everyone will benefit from the same supports, being treated equally, and move towards a model where everyone can participate without any supports or accommodations, because the cause of the inequity is either removed and or addressed. It isn't about giving everyone the same tool, it's about giving everyone the same access. The 7 principles of universal design is a design of products, environments, and services that are usable by all people and provide the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptations. Universal design does not only relate to the physical built environment, but also takes into account awareness, wellness, social integration, and cultural appropriateness. Universal design does consist of 7 principles, the following 7 principles: equitable use, flexible in use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, tolerance of error, low physical effort, size and space of approach and use. In short, universal design is meant to make the built environment, products, and services easier, healthier, and friendlier for people to use. As we continue to build our community, universal design needs to be a fundamental aspect of all the work that we're doing, and should not be an afterthought. We must move beyond meeting only the minimal standards. I mentioned earlier, the engagement process for the strategy extended a year and provided several engagement tools targeting their priority populations in the hopes that all people wishing to participate had the opportunity to provide their feedback, knowledge, and living experience. Engagement opportunities included the following events and tools. We hosted a variety of focus groups and we had 30 participants attend. We provided online and print surveys, and we had 134 completed, both online and in print format. We attended a variety of community events and provided post-it board questions for commenting. So we did attend 10 community events and interacted with well over 300 individuals regarding accessibility, inclusion, diversity within those community events. We also had individual conversations and engaged with 55 individuals, both formally and informally, in those conversations. The feedback received was categorized into 6 categories, as on the screen. In total, we had 59 objectives identified within the strategy, in alignment with the principles found in the Accessible BC Act. Each objective has several actions, and where applicable, we have identified related policies and or the strategies that go along with that, existing strategies, I should say. It's important to note that not all of the actions identified are within the city's jurisdiction. And in these situations, the city will advocate to the appropriate level of government to ensure the voice of our citizens are heard. These objectives are listed on page 27 of the strategy. As a component of the Accessible BC Act, the objectives within the strategy will be reviewed every 3 years. Additionally, as our community continues to grow and develop, new objectives, actions, and recommendations may emerge and can become part of the strategy. Thank you. Any questions?
All right, thank you so much for your presentation. There's no recommendation, it's just discussion, so I don't need a motion on the table before we start. So I will just take questions. Seeing any hands right now? Councillor Schiller?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to staff for the presentation. I'm glad we're thinking about this and doing this work. I think for myself, I do sort of tend to think about the built environment when I'm thinking about this sort of thing. Can you maybe just give me some examples of things that are not built environment, where the city could make some changes?
Yes. So within the strategy, you'll see that there's programming is listed as a big component too. So if people in our community, as part of the engagement, are looking for more inclusive programming or programming that is specific to persons with disabilities and diverse abilities. So that's one area that we could expand out into, definitely. Great.
Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Chair. And through you to staff, thank you for the presentation. It's really wonderful to see this kind of work in place. And I'm looking at the list of the objectives and actions, and there's some great actions here. And I'm wondering, I see progress status updates for a few of them, and I'm wondering for the rest of them, where does timeline come in, priorities, how do you decide, the budget allocation, where does that sort of implementation plan come into place?
So that will be one of our next steps, is to build an implementation plan and to bring that back to council. And then included in that implementation plan will be more of a timeline, if we're able to break out costs, that sort of thing. The other piece to remember too is that some of the objectives that we've listed are ongoing objectives also. So there are things to take into consideration when we are, for example, replacing our parks and our playgrounds, the accessibility components, how do we incorporate that? So those are just going to be in the back of staff mind and ongoing going forward too.
Right, thank you. That's wonderful. And the reason why I want to ask is because I know we have a few other strategies, right? I'm thinking, for example, the youth strategy that is also in play, and I see a few things here that would sort of this interplay between the both of them. So I just want to make sure that they weave in together nicely. Is there sort of a plan where we sort of look at this and then look at the other strategies that we have in play as well?
Yes, definitely, and that's why one of the columns, I'm just going back and just making sure. Yeah, so under the objectives, we do have a column that says related policies, and that is policies and or strategies that we were able to identify in this initial piece where that objective may sit over couple of different strategies. For example, in the built environment around, I can't remember exactly how it's said in here, sorry, I just need to go back and look at the title. Walkability in roadways, we have identified that the strategic transportation plan does identify some of these similar objectives. So we'll be working very closely with engineering to ensure that we're following the same guidelines and that we're working on the same pieces. And really just collaborating and making sure that we are combining our resources.
Thank you.
Okay, I do have a couple of questions. Yep, okay. Just on the guiding the work piece, because we do have a piece in here around truth and reconciliation as part of our planks, and it's in the, I'm just wondering if some of the documents, because we have, there's, you know, UNDRIP and there's DRIPA, which is provincial legislation, and the TRC calls to action. I'm wondering if we did look at any of those documents, or it will be part of our guiding the work.
So in the Truth and Reconciliation, in the Accessible BC Act, there is a piece around, I don't want to say truth and reconciliation, but identifying our First Nation partners. So this did come out of the engagement piece, and I have been in contact with Katarina, so she's aware that it's in here, and we will be working and collaborating together on that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it would be good to have, whether it's the calls to action or DRIP or something in guiding our work, because it is a chunk of our one of the planks that's in here. I don't know what to call it. I'm just going to scroll through. I think I had a couple other questions. I'm really glad to see this. This is a big piece of work, and I know we're mandated to do it, but I think it's just good work regardless of being mandated to have this in place. And you know, we were very, very lucky to have you know, our committee, the Mackey committee, in place for very many years. It's been doing this good work, so we can help to lean on that. I do love that you're talking about sign language. More and more times I'm going to events where they have someone signing, and it's really cool. Just makes their events even more accessible. I love the wayfinding piece, and any, you know, to have a good event, the wayfinding, really, people know where to go, what to do, and they know what's expected of them. It really elevates their experience. And so I was really glad to see some of those pieces. And I just had, you know, I starred this one. I know you guys have heard me speak about it before. Under the civic participation, the financial access, the financial assistance piece, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, what comes out of that. I know there's been some discussions, but you know, when we look at those that are some of our lower income families or lower income citizens, and making sure they have access to, there's no barriers for them to have access, is really, really important to me. Even though we do charge a nominal fee, I still think that can be a barrier to many folks in our community. So I am looking forward to that one being expanded. And then I just started the truth and reconciliation piece. We talked about that. And then I have a question on 3.4, which is the LGBTQ2S+ one. And the only action we sort of have in here is look for opportunities to identify and create more crosswalks throughout the town. Is there anything else that can be, like, I feel like this is though it's a significant piece, because it really does show our community in a very public way that we're inclusive and accepting and welcoming. But are there other ways that we can signal that to the community?
So the LGBTQ two-spirited community, there wasn't a lot of engagement or feedback from that community, and I would like to go back to them and specifically target certain organizations that do work and get some more feedback. The thing to note is that the strategy that we've built here, we were starting this work prior to the legislation requirements. So that's why it is more of a, I guess, a diverse look to it, in the sense that we are including some other populations, the newcomers, LGBTQ, cultural, that sort of thing. So it's not just around the accessibility piece, but yes, definitely something that we could look at. One of the feedbacks that we did get around the LGBTQ were gender neutral washrooms.
Yeah.
So they do appreciate the gender neutral washrooms, but they also would really like to still have the, how do you say it, specific gender washrooms too. And that is captured in a different area in here. So there are things that kind of can bleed over from one population to another.
And of course, our festivals too, we are big supporters of the Pride Festival.
Definitely, yeah.
And that's a great way to do.
And sorry, to add to that, there are kind of some other splatterings in here. So for example, under staff training is the piece to provide better resources to staff to support those users as well. So there's little smatterings of these things throughout the strategy.
Thank you. And the other piece I really appreciated was starting to look at translation of our documents on our website. Because we don't have a lot of translation within any of, I don't think we have anything that we translate that we distribute within the community. And with a changing community, I think it's really important that we look at those options. More and more cities are seeing, more and more organizations you're seeing, there's, you know, some key languages on their website that you can click to translate the documents, and you know, the sooner we can do that, I always think the better. Just so that people are more aware of what's happening and going on, and yeah, and I do, you know, when you talked about the accessibility is more than just physical accessibility. It really is removing those barriers so that people of all communities can participate. And I loved what you said, that it's not the same tools, it's the same access. I don't know if I'd ever heard that before, maybe something Coiner, it's a new thing, but I really liked that. I think that really sort of wrapped it up as to what we're looking at. It's not everybody has access to a pool. It's like everybody has, has the same tools, they have the same pool, but do they have access to the pool the same way that everybody does, and whatever access they need. So I really like the strategy. So thank you very much for the presentation.
And I just wanted to talk about around the financial access piece as well. Is a lot of the programming we're doing now is it's already shifting where we are trying to find programming that's high revenue that'll subsidize other programming as well. We're getting into hockey programming, things like that will help that cause. And the programming that we're creating now, we're creating with a poverty reduction lens. So for example, some of the programming is beyond your traditional recreation. We will have, we work with the Menship, and they'll support youth on how to fix things around their homes. So it saves them money somewhere else, allows them to spend it somewhere else. Gardening allows them to grow their own food. We teach them how to cook, we teach them how to store the food, cook in bulk, and that allows them to save money and spend it elsewhere. So that whole philosophy is being wrapped around all our programming now.
Great. Well. Yeah, community kitchens are important.
Absolutely.
There's just one other thing I just want to share with the team before we go, and just to be cognizant of the photos that you include in reports, and that they represent the diversity within our community. So I just want to acknowledge that we can make sure that they're showing some diverse pieces in our community. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for all the work you're doing on this. This truly is important work, and I was really grateful to see it on my table.
I'll just mention that we are going to be, like I said, working on the implementation plan. We'll be bringing that back to council for endorsement. So
Great.
that will be our
Thank you.
next step. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to 5.2, which is Logie, another very important big piece of work going on in our community, the Logie Transit Corridor Area Plan Update and Proposed Next Steps. I'll just give a couple of minutes where we have a shift of folks. We've been joining. We're well supported by an amazing team at council today with us. I think we're ready for any questions we have for you. Just let me know when you're ready to go, and just start anytime.
Before we jump into the PowerPoint, I just wanted to take a moment to set the stage, if you will, about kind of why we are here today. So this piece of work began a number of years ago, and this is the first opportunity that this council will have to really delve into the elements of the Logie Transit Corridor. So I'd say this is an excellent opportunity to ask questions about how we got here, as well as where we're going from here. No decisions are necessarily being made today. This is really a great opportunity to provide input, and then which is covered in the report and the presentation, what next steps look like from there. So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Good morning, Council. This workshop presentation will provide an update on the Logie Transit Corridor Area Plan. We'll begin with background information and describe the evolving planning context for this area. We'll then cover key aspects of the area plan that are currently under review by staff, and then conclude with proposed next steps for your consideration. When we're referring to the low-heat transit corridor, this is the area that extends from the city's western boundary to the town center along Lougheed Highway and Dewdney Trunk Road. Most of the properties in this area are between Lougheed Highway and Dewdney Trunk Road, but it's worth noting that this area plan does include Dewdney Trunk Road as shown on the map. This area has key transportation linkages to Pitt Meadows, Langley, and beyond, and has been identified as a major transit growth corridor by Metro Vancouver. The existing suburban and highway-oriented development presents significant opportunities for growth and development in this area. To provide some background information on this project, work started in 2018 when the low-heat transit corridor study was initiated to review the long-term planning for this area. In 2019, there were a series of events and a community survey to engage the public and collect their feedback. In 2020, the low-heat transit corridor concept plan was endorsed by council, which introduced guiding principles, objectives, and land use designations for this area. In 2021, the official community plan amending bylaw for this area was given first reading, which introduced the low-heat transit corridor area plan and development permit area guidelines that are shown on the screen. In 2022, the official community plan amending bylaw was brought forward for second reading, and at that time, it was referred back to staff by council for further review. Since then, there has been ongoing area planning and interdepartmental studies, the most recent being a traffic analysis looking at the existing road network and generating a model to see how traffic would be impacted by new developments in this area. Based on the early public engagement and planning work that was done for this area, a community vision was developed. Shown on the screen are three components of this vision: transit nodes, high streets, and the greenway. The transit nodes are higher density urban areas along Lougheed Highway that act like hubs, with commercial uses on the ground floor and office space or residential uses above. There are two transit nodes in the area plan located at 203rd Street and Lady Street. These areas would be built up around transit so residents and visitors can easily connect to these locations and meet their daily needs. The high streets run north-south and connect Lougheed Highway to Dewdney Trunk Road. The high streets identified in the plan include 203rd Street, Lady Street, and 216th Street. These areas would have more of a neighborhood feel, with small-scale commercial spaces such as restaurants, cafes, and boutique shops, and above these would be low-rise apartments. Lastly, the Greenway is an active transportation route that runs through the middle of the area plan, where people can comfortably walk, roll, or cycle. It's been mapped along streets as shown by the green dotted line on the map, but the intention is for the Greenway to feel more like a park, with wide paths, trees, benches, and it would connect to several new parks within this area and the McKenney Creek Conservation Area. Since the Lougheed Transit Corridor Area Plan was given first reading in 2021, the planning context for this area has evolved and presented new opportunities. Factors include the new council strategic plan, strategic transportation plan, and other new plans, the bus rapid transit line announced between Maple Ridge and Langley, updated regional planning guidance under Metro 2050 and Transport 2050, new provincial housing legislation under Bills 44, 46, and 47, and opportunities to collaborate more closely with external partners such as TransLink and the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. To incorporate these new elements into the long-term planning for the Lougheed Transit Corridor, staff are currently reviewing several key aspects of the area plan, which include the area plan boundaries, the land use designations and policies, climate action policies, mobility, and placemaking and community building. We'll be going through each of these aspects individually to provide more information on how they contribute to the area plan and why they are important aspects to consider. The area plan boundaries define where policies within the area plan and the development permit guidelines are applied. These boundaries are currently under review to ensure sufficient area for new development along major corridors, including Lougheed Highway and Dewdney Trunk Road, to provide appropriate transitions in height and density, to plan for the new transit-oriented development area at Maple Meadows, and to align the boundaries more closely with other area plans, such as the town center area plan. The map on the screen shows new areas identified in blue that we are taking a closer look at to assess how they will interface with the Lougheed Transit Corridor area plan. These areas are primarily located adjacent to Lougheed Highway or Dewey Trunk Road, with a larger area identified near the Maple Meadows West Coast Express Station. The land use designations and policies provide guidance on how land could be used in the future and what types of buildings would be appropriate for a given property. These land uses are under review to ensure the designations and policies can be clearly and easily understood, to incorporate new densities allowed under Bills 44 and 47, to identify landmark sites and areas appropriate for higher density, and to ensure commercial and employment designations are flexible and to support businesses and future investment in this area. The climate action policies are particularly important for the Lougheed Transit Corridor, as the map on the screen from the draft urban forest management strategy shows that this area experiences relatively higher temperatures compared to other areas in the city with greater tree canopy coverage. These climate action policies are under review to plan more effectively for the impacts of climate change, to provide equitable access to parks and green space, to develop green active transportation routes, such as the Greenway we discussed earlier, and to align planning in the plan with the urban forest management strategy. The mobility policies for the Lougheed Transit Corridor aim to enhance transit and active transportation while mitigating traffic and congestion as this area develops over time. These policies are under review to improve transportation equity by providing multiple options for people of all ages and abilities, to coordinate land uses and development with the future bus rapid transit along Lougheed Highway, to align the planning with the new strategic transportation plan, and to leverage partnerships with TransLink and the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. Policies for placemaking and community building aim to create vibrant neighborhoods along the Lougheed Transit Corridor with a sense of place for residents and visitors. These policies are under review to develop special planning precincts with defining elements along the Lougheed Transit Corridor, to ensure new development reflects the community's identity through architecture and design, to provide gathering spaces for socializing and community events, and to further incorporate the community's input into the area plan. With the new provincial legislation for small-scale multi-unit housing, transit-oriented development areas, and inclusionary zoning, the long-term planning for this area requires some adjusting. To expedite the required updates for this area, new development, pre-application meetings, and applications within the Lougheed Transit Corridor have been temporarily paused. This pause is intended to help minimize revisions for development applications and provide greater certainty on the requirements. Current applicants can contact the planning department with any questions they may have. And the webpage for the Lougheed Transit Corridor on the city's website has also been updated with additional information and links to previous council reports. In terms of timelines for this project and the proposed next steps, it's worth noting that the most recent opportunity for public engagement on the Lougheed Transit Corridor was in 2019. There is now the opportunity to share new information with the public and gather updated community feedback for council's consideration. Once the Lougheed Transit Corridor area plan is updated, staff recommend conducting public engagement, which would include a minimum of an open house event, a community survey, webpage updates, and a communications campaign. Should council proceed with the recommended public engagement option, staff would conduct the engagement prior to second reading in the third quarter of this year. The recommendations outlined in the report are now on the screen for your consideration. This concludes the presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And I think this one, like the last presentation, shows that we're actually ahead of the provincial legislation and doing the work before we're actually mandated to do it. Although the legislation coming down has had to shift our work and in some cases slowed it down a little bit while we rejig things, but it does show that we're on the right path, right? So thank you. So just so council knows that's joining us, so the actual explanation of option 1 is on page 56, and there's 2 other options there if anybody would like to change it, but option 1 that's in the recommendation is that the staff conduct public engagement essentially before it comes back to second reading, whereas the other ones, the public engagements later on in the process. So would someone like to move that recommendation? Introduce to it, moved by Councillor Schiller, seconded by Councillor Youssef. Okay, I'll open it up for questions. Councillor Jose, you have a question? Nope, you were just moving and seconding? Councillor Youssef.
I was trying to second it, but then Ahmed was faster than I am.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to staff for the presentation and report. I recall last term, council had some recommendations around height restrictions to be removed, around as well the transit nodes or hubs where there were some adjustments there. I didn't see those in this report. There's also something around the M2 zoning, so can I get clarity on what would be allowable uses in M2 and where it would fit along the corridor plan, please?
I could speak to the height restrictions part to start. So through the chair, those aspects may not have been included there into the report because those height restrictions are already included in this current version of the area plan. So currently for the commercial mixed use designation that's in the area plan, there are no maximum height restrictions, but there is a minimum requirement of 4 stories. This is just to provide flexibility. So on a site by site basis, the staff can work with the applicant to decide what's the appropriate height for that area.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And of course, within that, through the chair, we're looking at the possibility of up to 12 stories with mixed use as allowable all along the corridor. However, as you mentioned, the minimum is 4 stories, and then depending on the actual site.
Through the chair, we have a couple different designations that are present along the corridor. So as I spoke to earlier, the commercial designation is the highest residential density, where it can be anywhere from 4 stories to 12 or up or beyond 20. The majority of the corridor is actually designated transit corridor multifamily. So this would support low-rise apartments, and those would be set at a maximum of 6 stories.
That's where I would beg to differ, that especially around the transit nodes, if we're allowed to go up to 20 stories as per the legislation, then I think we should build that in so as to be ahead of the game, ahead of the legislation that is being rolled out, rather than restricting it to 6 stories and then having to go back and revisit later. So that's speaking to the transit nodes and within the 200 meters, if I'm not mistaken, of the transit nodes. And then 12 stories would be what would be allowable for the entirety of the corridor. Again, not to say that we are going to see 12-story buildings all along, but having that being an allowed height. And then if we need to dial it down per site because of ground restrictions or otherwise, then we would have that ability. That would be my feel and my input on the height restrictions piece. The other one is on townhouses and row homes. Are we still allowing that zoning? And I'm sorry, I have to say that's not the best use of space. Maybe staff can enlighten me.
So I think maybe one element to keep in mind is that the concept plan that is shown in the report and the presentation is the one that received first reading in 2021. So it is the one that is officially had a nod from a council previously. The purpose of today's conversation is to hear that level of feedback about what type of heights and uses that you are most interested in seeing, and then we'll bring back a revised concept. So I do offer a bit of caution about some of the policies that are in the existing LTCAP. If it does say a minimum or a maximum, there's still some flexibility and we can make those amendments. So hearing those comments about townhouses, of course, we can certainly overlay that, or at least when we bring back that next report, whether to council or the community, we can have that additional justification as to why we still feel it's a good use in those locations and where and or why it's been removed from other locations.
Sorry, thank you. And through the chair, that's my intention, is to ensure that when we go out to the public, we are giving them something that they can really sink their teeth into. And it is along the lines of, as I said, being able to accommodate the coming legislation rather than having to be reactive to it. So yeah, back to the townhouses, I don't see that as great use of space, especially along that corridor. It'll provide for a lot of access points without having the density to those properties as well. So if we can go higher, that would be great. On the M2 zone, please, along the corridor, can I get clarity on that and possibly why what potential uses could there be within M2 and whether it would fit within what I've been speaking to thus far?
So within the corridor, I believe it's the M7 that is being proposed as the mixed use employment. It is currently under review. We certainly did hear what council shared the last time we were before council.
21, yeah.
It is waiting on to analysis before we're going to be able to speak to the details of what will be within that zone. Because I believe the report lightly touches on how we may have new land uses and or zones to accommodate. So that particular zone is a bit of a work in progress at this point in time.
Okay, and I would greatly appreciate having that clarity before we go to public engagement again, so that way we're providing the public with a clear vision of how this is gonna work. Lastly, through you, Madam Chair, do we have any input or clarity at this point on the Fraser River escarpment results? Because that'll affect the heights and densities massively along this corridor.
Through the chair, I believe we are proceeding as we have been regarding the Fraser River escarpment. We are actively having conversations on how that impacts both the small scale multi-unit housing enabled under Bill 44, as well as 47, and then ultimately how that will impact the Logie Transit Corridor.
So we're still holding applications, awaiting the results.
I don't believe they're on hold. I believe they're going to be subject to the building regulations the regulations in place at building permit stage.
Through the chair to Councillor Youssef, the current policies are still in place. We are about to tender actually get more additional subsurface information, which we feed it out. That's going to be a couple-year process. And then from that, we can do our study. Its current process policies in place, no different than we've got building code changes, but seismic's being held off another year. So we know it's being reviewed, but until that's done, the current policies apply. Nothing's being held. There are active policies, council policies that have not been changed.
Thank you for that. And through the chair, to follow up, now knowing that we are proceeding with applications, are we focused on site by site geotechnical reports to be able to accommodate whether the application should proceed or not? And of course, hearing that we're 2 years out from those results is not good for me, but I'll be quiet about that a bit.
Through the chair, that is my understanding for the in-stream development application.
So it's site by site. Thank you very much. Thank you for the clarifications. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions and comments.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Schiller and then Councillor Tan.
Thank you, staff. This is a big piece for us, certainly an area I think a lot about when I think about the future of the community. So just looking at the timeline, when this was referred back to staff in 2022, can you just sort of summarize for me what some of the comments from council were at that time?
Through the chair, I'll be honest, it wasn't my project at that point, so I'm kind of going on memory here. So at the time, there were conversations about density in terms of where it was, what types of heights were being permitted in which locations, as well as how best to facilitate the employment use or the employment concept within the community, one element of which was, of course, its integration into the Logie Transit Corridor. So from my perspective, in terms of what I took away from it at that point in time, those were the two bigger narratives that I was familiar with. I can certainly go back into the council recordings to see what else was said. But in terms of the notes that we had on the file, those were the two larger items that we wanted to take a closer look at when we were going to bring this back. So after that council conversation, we actually initiated an industrial commercial land use review of the community in order to build that rationale for where we were locating which type of employment uses, and those results have been fed into the work that we are currently undertaking, so it will be part of that next version that comes forward.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, it sounds like those considerations are things that are still being incorporated, and that's mostly what I was concerned about. I do have some specific questions sort of about some of this. I think some of it's probably around really what the province is doing, but this is my chance to ask it. Off-street parking. Can we talk a little bit about off-street parking and what that will look like in? I mean, did the changes that the province has announced impact this area plan?
So elements of the Bill 47 will impact parts of the Loki Transit Corridor. So if any area within what's called a TOA will have removed the ability to require off-street parking for your traditional residential parking stalls. We still have the ability to require commercial parking stalls, so it's not entirely a yes or no. And then under Bill 44, if it's next to a prescribed bus stop, which we know we have a couple in this area, those ones we are also unable to require parking. So for the lots that will be allowed up to 6, we can't require parking, but up to 4, we can require parking. The ratios of what type of parking we will be able to require is slated to come before council in May. So you'll have that opportunity to provide input. We'll provide a range that will be from where we're starting out up to what the province is recommending through their policy manual, and that is a conversation and a decision that council can make.
I'd like to talk a little bit as well about the Greenway. So this is a piece that really interests me. I'm very glad to hear that it's sort of envisioned as being more park-like and less street-like, because I think we need to get people out of cars, and we're gonna have to provide them with something attractive to get them out there. So I know there's the route of the Greenway is shown on the map. Can you just help me understand a little bit more about like how it actually is constructed and how the property like that we need to build that is acquired?
Great question.
Actually, let me stick out on that. So let me just contextualize this for council. Timing of this work is key, given all of the moving parts that we have. BRT is coming on. There's a meeting tomorrow with staff between Modi and TransLink. BRT is coming to Maple Ridge. Right now, the target is by 2030. So the ability for us to start aligning the corridor to service the needs of residents, not only today, but in the next 20 years. You've also seen draft several months ago, the updated housing numbers that Urban Matters had put together, because keep in mind, you've got an updated housing needs assessment report that is in draft. And that presentation, if you recall, demonstrated that between now and the next 20 years, there's another 35,000 parcel units coming online in Maple Ridge in order to meet not only Maple Ridge's extended growth curve, but also the requirements of the new provincial legislation. So that equates to roughly 65,000 people. And the ability for us to work with Modi and TransLink and businesses and developers along the Lougheed Highway corridor is a game change for Maple Ridge, in addition to the downtown core. So we need to figure out between now and the next 20 years, where can Maple Ridge accommodate another 65,000 residents? And you don't want, as I've said before, you don't want to put a 40-story building out in Ruskin. Because you don't have the infrastructure. So you want to be able to force the infrastructure into areas that are already ripe for redevelopment. We know we have force mains going down Liberty Highway. We know that as we densify, we want to attract jobs and employment into Maple Ridge, and you want to put those around areas where you have urban forestry, where you have access to parks, where you have access to retail and commercial, access to jobs, and you have access to what is the essence, the quality of life that Maple Ridge wants to aspire to become and to deliver to residents, not only today, but to tomorrow. So the ability for staff to provide guidance to council along the LTCAP, really it's an unknown right now because of the BRT discussion. We don't know, we have a rough guesstimate of where the stations would go. We don't know exactly where they're physically gonna land. That is still undetermined. And what you're gonna wanna do from a purely economics perspective is build your commerce in and around those nodes. And so that is going to affect the final decision of what council will decide of how that whole area plan looks. What staff are looking at right now is, as we've got all these moving parts, we want to make sure that council's aware that we're not yet ready to make decisions and determination of what that entire area plan looks like. But we want to be able to say, these are the moving parts that we're aware of. This is the conversation. And today, it's important for council to express some of their concerns or their wants or wishes or desires as we build out that plan for the next year or so of work. And we're anticipating bringing this back, hopefully before the break, with some more details, especially as we work with TransLink and Modi or what that corridor looks like. So Councillor Schiller, with respect to how the green infrastructure is going to work, we honestly don't know, because we don't know what that road corridor is going to look like with BRT. Once TransLink has defined whether it's center lane, curb lane, then the city can then start working with those other partners and say, look, are we going to put a bike path there? Is it going to be a walking path? How's all that going to look? What is the impact on that road corridor? And so what's important for us today to hear is, look, we want a bike path. We want a pedestrian corridor. We want street trees. We want those green infrastructure. So as the engineering department, the planning department, and InterGov and economic development, everyone is working with Modi and TransLink over the next several months, we can express those wishes to those agencies that are going to be bringing more information back to the city. And we'll be doing more presentations to council as we build out that entire piece. So the two big components are, one, you've got a housing needs assessment that says we got to find houses for 65,000 people. 2,000 units a year is what they're estimating over the next 20 years is what we need to hit. And then in addition to that is, what are we going to be able to do with BRT? And that's really the game change going down Liberty Highway. So I don't have answers. What we have is a lot more moving parts. And what staff need to know is, kind of at a super high level, what are those key important pieces for us to be building into this plan? And economic development is one of them, jobs, employment, as well as service areas. Where do you want the grocery stores? Where do you want the coffee shops? How high do you want to go? We have struggles with FRE, we know that. But as we work through the FRE piece, it's also going to dovetail nicely with the final decisions around BRT. And that information will be coming to council once TransLink and Modi kind of figure out what that next piece looks like, in addition to the fact that they need funding in order to develop on the capital side.
Fair enough. Lots of moving pieces, lots going on. Well, then on that piece, I'll just say, look, I think the thing is that it's really important that we get this green infrastructure piece really baked in from the get-go, because if we get too far down the development road, it's going to just be even more difficult to try and fit these pieces in after the fact. And I think, you know, putting Lougheed aside, I mean, if the Greenway it's in the middle, right? It's between Dewdney, it's between Lougheed. And I think that's what we wanted. We don't, you know, bikes and pedestrians and highway traffic are not a good mix. I think we want a separation of those things. I think that's the kind of environment that will invite people to come in it. So I just want us to keep focused on that. And, you know, in terms of the housing types and the densities and employment, I just think diversity is really important. I think we try and keep it as, you know, as open as we can without being too prescriptive about it, and just really try to include a good mix of commercial and employment and residential together in this sort of more urban area that we're developing. I just, a couple more specifics, but I'm happy to leave it there for now and digest and let others enter.
Why don't we go to Counselor Tan and then we'll come back.
I don't think we have Councillor Tan.
She did text me that she's still here. She's off screen, but she's still here. Yeah, okay, go ahead, Counselor Tan.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate that. Yeah, that was an interesting discussion. I appreciate the question that Councillor Schiller brought up and appreciate Scott's answer. I think for my part, just some things I really appreciate about this plan. It is a big growth area and it is an incredibly important piece of work. So I'm listening very attentively and reading this report with great curiosity because from my context, between the town center and the LTCAP, this is where we're going to accommodate the other 60,000 people. And we want to do this well. And so given all that, I really am appreciative of this work that staff brought forward. Some things I really love about this plan. I love the placemaking portion idea of it. I love the emphasis on the high streets, the transit nodes, the greenways. That really tells me that we're moving away from the suburban automobile-centered community and moving to a place where it is walkable, that's something I really appreciate. I know I saw mentions on social gathering spaces and parks in the report. And again, I appreciate that because we're moving towards, I think the council direction is moving towards this place where we have not an automobile-centered community, but a walkable community. And that's really that North Star that I think that a lot of us are aiming towards. And so for conversations like, how high do we go? I think the reality is we have to accommodate 60,000 people, right? And not all of them will fall in there, but a lot of them will. And really, we do want a lot of them to fall in this area of the town center and LTCAP. So as how high do we need to go? Enough to accommodate folks. And having said that, I think, again, my focus here is on livability and walkability along with affordability. I think about Metrotown, for example, and how that developed. I don't want us to develop like Metrotown, where, it's a very interesting place where it's become so dense. I've seen it densify over the last 20 years. And you think as it densifies, it becomes more walkable, it becomes greener as space is used more efficiently. But that's not the experience that people have. Metrotown has become a dense automobile-centered community. And there's something that's not very friendly about when walking around in Metrotown, where you have cars weaving out and in and out among all the new businesses and there. And it's not a very pedestrian friendly and oriented walkable neighborhood in my perception. And I think a lot of folks would agree with that. And so when in terms of how high, I think the conversation is a very interesting conversation. I certainly appreciate Councillor Youssef's point of bake it into the plan so people have a certainty. And then in terms of where I sit with that, in terms of the specific number, I would say my focus is on being able to accommodate everyone and also do it in a way. I'm more concerned about the structure of how we plan and how we lay out our green spaces, our social gathering spaces, our transit nodes and how we do placemaking. So I think that's the larger conversation to keep oriented towards. I do want to touch on the Westridge Greenway piece because, I think that's incredibly important. And I really hear I really support what Councillor Schiller is saying. I can appreciate that the BRT is a big moving part where we're dealing with Moti, we're dealing with TransLink, and also a whole bunch of property owners along that way. I remember that conversation we had about the orphan lot strategy around the Lougheed Town Center area. And I know there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of stakeholders to work with. And I also see that within the plan, the Westridge Greenway is, as Councillor Schiller said, by and large in the middle of that plan. So, in the middle between Lougheed and Uni. And so, I would be curious to see how the BRT plans affect the Westridge Greenway, given that from what I can see, they're quite different geographic areas, or at least the plan of the different geographic areas. So in my understanding, I don't know if Scott is still in the room, I would love to understand how that BRT plan affects the Westridge Greenway.
Scott has just stepped out of the room. Can we just hold that until he gets back in?
Yeah, for sure. And then we can come back to that. So that's my point on the Westridge Greenway. And when Scott comes back, we can get him to address that.
Actually, walking back in the room.
Just at the right time, Mr. Hartman.
There's another, Counselor Tan has some further questions around the Greenway piece. So Counselor Tan, do you want to just pose your question again to?
Yeah, and so Scott, I appreciate what you said about BRT being a large moving part, the different stakeholders of Modi, TransLink, and the different property developers along the way. I just wanted to make sure I understand, because as Councillor Schiller said, at least the proposed Westridge Greenway location is by and large located between Dewdney and Lougheed. So in my mind, the BRT development wouldn't touch the Westridge Greenway. Could you elaborate on that for me?
Well, Councillor Tan, you're right in concept. I think what we're looking for at this level is, as we build out this area of Maple Ridge, what are those connection points? And so it doesn't be a complete game change. What we don't want to do is duplicate. And so if council's decision is that you'd like to go in between Lougheed and Dewdney Trunk Road, those are areas, you're absolutely correct, that wouldn't be directly impacted by BRT. What would be impacted is how we build up those economic nodes for around those stations, and what type of development you would be putting in, not only between the stations, but also between Lougheed Highway and Dewdney Trunk Road. And some of that's informed by the FRE and where that line goes, as well as we densify to accommodate those 65,000 additional residents, what's important as we build up those corridors. So you don't need to pause on the green belt. What you need to be aware of is you may want to start running bicycle lanes parallel to BRT down Lougheed, or you might want to take them completely off and have them work somewhere between Dewdney Trunk and Lougheed Highway. And that is the discussion that you can have at this level, because nothing is yet defined.
Right. I appreciate that, Scott. I think where I'm coming from, if I had to take a guess, is where Councillor Schiller is coming from, is that I don't necessarily want to kick the can down the road on this. I appreciate the not wanting to double on this, and then to sort of do this and then have to go back and look at the piece. But given where the BRT construction is at, I've heard the first time estimate I heard was 2026, the next one I heard was 2028. And then so there are pieces there, right? There's a moving timeline there, and each year that passes is another year that we don't work on this. So in terms of where this lines up, I would love to have that conversation much sooner rather than later. And I'm a little bit nervous. I'll just be kind of upfront. I'm a little bit nervous about postponing this conversation, because BRT is certainly the largest, shiniest piece here, and I wouldn't want this to get overlooked. So I think, where I'm at on this is in terms of my specific request here is that we have that conversation in a separate council workshop meeting. We look at this and we look at the timelines, we look at the options. If we do this, if we put in the center of geographic center, these are what the options look like. This is the impact on the economic nodes we develop. If we put it beside BRT, what's the likelihood that we're able to put it beside BRT? Because we know that the right of way is going to be very, very valuable there, along the BRT line. So I'm a bit nervous about pushing that discussion off and saying we're going to make it parallel to the BRT route. So I would love to have this discussion, a separate discussion on this Westridge Greenway at a separate council workshop, to take into account all those different options there. So my last
Carmen just wanted to respond to that piece before you move on to something else.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Tan, staff are in a full agreement. We don't want to kick this down the curb any longer. What we are suggesting, though, is as we roll out the LTCAP discussion, it also dovetails with the conversations that council's going to be having with TransLink coming up before the break. And so what we're looking for is let's generate this conversation once we have a few more known variables between Modi and TransLink, which would be probably by June. And then that informs the work that we're doing with urban forestry as well as our strategic transportation plan, so that we can make some design decisions as we roll out those pieces. So I'm not suggesting that we pause on this for a great deal of time. What I am alerting council to is that as we go through this public engagement process, it's going to start aligning itself with the BRT conversation. And then hopefully by the fall, if not end of fourth quarter of this year, you should have some ideals that staff can start building into the 2025 business plan to start executing on some of these components. Because you're absolutely right, Councillor Tan, we don't want to delay making these design decisions, waiting for the possibility of 2026, 2028, 2030, whatever that looks like with TransLink. But what we want to have is a game plan moving forward so that other areas of the organization can start delivering on council's strategic objectives.
I appreciate that, Scott. I see what you're saying too about not having maybe too many conversations and rather having conversations dovetail into each other. I think where I think maybe like a way we can collaborate on this is that if we can sort of have a discussion where there are more details. I'm hearing that in June that we're waiting for more details from Modi and from TransLink, and I'm very interested in understanding what kinds of details we're waiting for. What kinds of options. I think where you're hearing my interest lies, this is a great higher level LTCAP discussion, and I think that given the interest in this community for having this West Ridge Greenway move forward, I think on a governance end and just as a representative of this community is that I think at this point it would be useful for me to start dialing into the details. So I think that those details, like if just having a sit down where we say these are the details we're waiting for, these are the factors that staff are considering, would be helpful. Because overall, I think where we are, Maple Ridge is still by and large it is still an automobile central community, and it is very, very easy for these kinds of details to sort of get laid on the side of the table, despite all of our best intentions, right? And I just think that this is something that around this governance table is a matter of priority, and if it is, then it's something that we need to dig into the details of.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I also think, just to add on to that, one of the option and the motion that is on the table is that we go out to public engagement before it comes, back to second reading and stuff like that. And I think that's also a really, really important piece for us to be able to, all of us as council and staff, be able to move forward and sort of start digging into those plans and those details, is hearing what the community wants to see. Which will help us as we dig into those pieces. So I know this is again, I'm just taking liberty as chair here. This is a huge piece, and the BRT is a huge piece of the work that we're doing around this table. And I would hope that this is not something that comes back once a year, that it's this and the BRT are continually coming back to us for update. And I'm getting a nod from Mr. Hartman. So
for sure, Chair.
Yeah, and I think that will help us all as we move forward. I just have a couple of things, if you mind, if I jump in with a couple of questions. First of all, just on the parking piece, the legislation requires us to not have a minimum, but that's on housing. I know we can for commercial and accessibility, but that doesn't mean I just want to clarify, that doesn't mean there's gonna be no parking. We're just leaving it up to the developer to make a decision as to what they feel is appropriate for that development. Because they also won't be able to sell things if there's zero parking. So I just want to, that's where am I correct in that thinking that we can't mandate it, but the developer could likely still put some parking in these areas?
Through the chair, yes, that is a part of it. I think what will end up coming before council is going to be a bit of a split between the bike requirements and the parking requirements at that point. Depending if developers do wish to provide a lot of parking, that's one thing. If they want to provide the technical requirements in order to support the height of the building, we essentially have a limited amount of space and of course a set amount of amenities that we'd like in that space.
I don't think it's going to be a huge amount of parking that they deliver to us, but it'll be up to them. And the other piece is the biking, because I don't think the bike minimums was in the legislation, right? That was silent, the bike parking stuff?
That's correct. The bike minimums are in our draft off-street parking and loading bylaw, which has first reading. So
that will be our
come
ability to okay. Just a quick one other quick thing before going to the questions. I'm wondering if it's possible, just because obviously parks and conservation are a big piece, and when we're really looking at the plan, and I know this is kind of a strange request, but I'm wondering if it's possible to sort of identify the parks, just the parks in the area that are outside of the corridor, because that'll give us a good idea as how close is a park that's outside these barriers, so that, or these borders, so that we don't think that there's absolutely nothing, because there's other things that are very close just outside the border. So that's okay. Okay, so just to sort of add on to the parks and the tree strategy piece, I do want to again echo as other councillors have, that I think that is a priority for us. Through the consultation with our tree canopy, there's been a lot of sort of discussion or agreement that we do want to maintain, if not increase, our tree canopy, and that's important to not only us around the table, but I think the community at large has said the same thing as well. So we do need to be, I think, very purposeful in how we look at that, the walkway, the conservation, the greenways, the parks in our community. You know, I was at Metro last week and there was a lot of discussion about the challenges we're all going to see, because of course Metro has a 40% goal that they're trying to reach with the tree canopy too, in Metro Vancouver, and many communities with the new legislation are going to struggle a lot more with increasing their tree canopy, because where we would have some of our tree canopy in your traditional neighborhoods could be reduced significantly when you start putting 4 pieces on a property instead of 1, and so we're going to be losing it out there in the neighborhoods where we wouldn't normally lose it. So I think in a transit oriented place, it's we need to be purposeful in that. And also the other sort of great reports, the other report is around just the walkable community piece, and how it, you know, it increases our health, and so we decrease our need on health facilities, because we're in better health, and lowering obesity and diabetes are obvious ones, and some cancers, but it also just reduces carbon. So I think that we just need to be very purposeful in where we're putting that, because this is going to be our walkable community. These are going to be where we're going to target that piece. The other thing I want to talk about is just 203 versus Lady versus 216. So right now I'm seeing the BRT potentially, and again, I know there's discussions coming up. Mr. Hartman said these are just like we're not entirely sure where we're going to land. 203, obvious, that makes sense. It's in the proximity of Maple Meadows Station. It's going to be a massive hub like 203. But I'm wondering, like, how do we differentiate between like 216 and Lady? Lady, of course, has the hospital, and there's some more institutional stuff going in there. But 216th I see is the bigger intersection. So can you just talk about Lady versus 216th for me?
So when the conversation kind of started in 2018, 2019, I think one of the leading contenders for locating it at Lady was from that employment generation, the hospital element. People would be able to take transit there to go to work, and a previous iteration of the plan certainly had a fairly strong medical services employment node at that location. So it was also very helpful from an RS3 planning perspective, and that's what we've kind of run with since then. I think to some of the conversations that Mr. Hartman was alluding to, it is certainly an element that we can raise with TransLink and the ministry about whether or not this is the time to make a move, or if there's a justification either way. I can't necessarily speak to moving the site at this exact moment, but I would say when TransLink or ourselves come back with more of that BRT conversation, we'll fold it into that conversation. We'll have the details to be able to give you the information that you're looking for.
Yeah, and I guess I don't necessarily need the answer today. I get like the Lady Street and hospital, and also is probably more of a center point between 203 and 224 would be the next stop. But I've just always in my mind envisioned 216th being the larger hub. So, you know, I just be curious to know more about, you know, that as we move forward on going down this path. But that's really it for me. I'm just going to look at my scribble to make sure I didn't miss. No, I got it. I'm good. Councillor Schiller, I just want to double check. Councillor Dose, did you have any questions before I go to second round? Nope, you're good. Okay, Councillor Schiller, and then Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Chair. Great, thank you. Good discussion, and definitely, yeah, just helping me even just sort of with my own thoughts, because you know I see this as being such an opportunity for the community to develop in this, you know, quite significantly different way. But you know, this greenway is in my mind so key to it being done successfully. I think of other, you know, stories that occurred about other areas where, you know, developing that green infrastructure first was actually the catalyst for a lot of other development that happened. If the city can commit to, you know, providing this arterial route, I definitely see it away from Lougheed and Dewey, because I think that there's the difference. There's a difference between the arterial roads for the cars and where you want people and nature to be able to move at a different pace. And I think that if we can commit to that and really have that as a foundational piece of this area plan. That lets people know, you know, the direction that we're going, and we're obviously gonna have to think about how we're gonna manage development to deliver on that. I'm really glad to see like the climate action work and the urban forestry strategy being incorporated into this, and I mean, we've identified already that we need to add more green infrastructure, you know, into this area, and I think this is the moment to get that on the books. Part of the report says this work will inform on-site drainage requirements to manage stream flows and explore opportunities for new stormwater retention and detention facilities. Can you just explain to me a little bit more about what that could look like? So
I
in
believe
that,
Ms. Best has some input as well.
No,
or if you'd like to, but
Yes. I'd like just to share that right now we've got the climate change group, parks, engineering, stormwater management team, all working together to strategize a hierarchy of different types of greenways. What might this look for the future, our vision for Maple Ridge? So there'll be more urban standards. There'll be more green standards that will integrate and provide areas that will promote infiltration or stormwater management, natural features. In this corridor going between Lougheed and Dubney Trunk, we will be integrating stormwater management retention ponds and opening up the greenway areas to parks. This will also connect with several new parks that will need to be acquired in the neighborhood to accommodate the increase in densification of population. So we will love to come back to council to another workshop question. And I think once we develop the hierarchy, there's probably going to be 3 different standards: more urban in between and more green, that will accommodate a mix of pedestrian and intermodal uses. And I always say we have to dream the dream. Think of Cole Harbor. Why wouldn't we have a greenway where patios from restaurants or coffee shops wouldn't bubble out and look out onto this greenway? Where are the high points in this neighborhood that there might be vantage from the viewpoints of the mountains or the rivers? So all these things are being considered. We're taking an interdisciplinary approach. We're going to boots on the ground, walk our municipality, and then put this in context. And we very much welcome the opportunity. Council's made clear that they'd like to see us come back and share this with you and to get your comments on it.
thank you, Marlene. And yeah, just, I mean, that's it, right? I just think the rest of our community has been designed around the car, and that's not gonna work here. So I just need us to, you know, I hope that we're all on the same page about needing to do something different. I think it's very exciting. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you, Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before I get into more of what I wanted to talk about, I want to extend my gratitude to Ms. Best for mentioning the boots on the ground bit, as that has been historically a bane for us, that decisions are being made from cubicles rather than site visits and being there on the ground. So thank you for taking that approach and changing the philosophy of staff. I concur with Councillor Schiller on the fact that the greenway should be completely off Lougheed. I believe it just works better, and with the constrained space that we're gonna have on Lougheed, especially with the advent of the BRT coming in, it makes more sense. I will express that I would like to see more and more employment baked into this plan, as it is going to be the new face of Maple Ridge. It'll be a game changer altogether. So let's make sure that we have the urban employment opportunities for individuals to access office space or other forms of employment, so that we can retain more and more of our residents here rather than having them go outside to work and to shop and to recreate. Lastly, through you, Madam Chair, as we've heard from Mr. Hartman and others, there's so many unknowns and moving parts. I wonder if it'd be prudent to hold off on the public engagement piece until we have a more developed plan. Now, that may be second reading, unless there's a plan to have it come back to council before going to public engagement again, so we can actually see what we're going to get the public input on.
Mr. Hartman?
I think at this stage, with respect to Councillor Youssef's comments, this is at such a high level of the engagement pieces. Staff are seeking the direction to start moving the discussion forward with the community, as well as aligning with the BRT pieces. So if we have that mandate from council, we'll inform on the front end as we go through. But at this level, what we want to be able to do is take this at a 10,000 foot level. We want to be able to address some of the concerns that Councillor Tan's raised, Councillor Schiller and others around the greenways and move those conversations forward. It also aligns with the work of Ms. Richmond's team with Urban Forestry, so that we can start those general conversations at a high level. What we need to be able to do is start engaging the community in what they're looking for from a visionary perspective as we talk about redesigning LTCAP. Because to Councillor Schiller's earlier comment, this is a game changer for Maple Ridge. And we want to make sure that we have all of those viewpoints and vantage points. And so doing some initial engagement at a visionary level, I think is important for the next steps moving this forward. It's not getting into the intimate details of what this zoning is going to look like and all those pieces, but we want to be able to start the process of talking to the public and then bring that information back to council. That'll also inform all those other moving parts that we have, so that council has more data when we get ready to make some of those design decisions. I'd rather move forward now than wait until all these parts are a little more detailed and then start that general piece.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hartman, for that. And that alleviates a little bit of my concern that we are going to stay at a high level rather than, of course, we can stay at a high level here at the table. When it comes to the public, they're going to be talking about each individual corner and how high the curb should be and those minutia types of details. So if the public engagement is going to be at that very same level, I would be more comfortable with that moving forward. The last thing I want is for us to go out to the public with this version of the plan, and then later on coming forward with a different version and them saying that's not what we asked for, that's not what we agreed to, and that's not what we were looking to. So I'm seeing the nods around the table. All right, I'm going to be quiet and let this proceed as such. Thank you very much to all of staff for the input today and for the wonderful information that you provided. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Councillor Tan.
Thank you for that, Councillor Youssef. I agree. It's a very important piece of work. Thank you to all the staff for all your really deep crunching on this, particularly the BRT coming in and with the provincial legislation coming in. I definitely understand it's a challenge to put together even somewhat of a coherent package to bring to us today. So I really appreciate your work on this. The last piece that I was really happy to see in the plan was around the areas under review. That was just broadening the LTCAP area, because I thought it was very thoughtful to say they are transitioning in terms of height and in terms of buildings, type of buildings, between the LTCAP area and between the other neighborhoods that border the LTCAP. So I appreciate that. I also wonder if there's an opportunity to broaden those areas under review to ensure that there's sort of a larger, in terms of being able to accommodate more folks, the 65,000 in the next X number of years, and probably the more that will come, whether it's worth broadening that area, then those areas under review, so that there's just a larger piece of land that we have to work with. I think about that, especially given the R3, not the R3, the BRT bus stops coming in, and just more people will be looking to live in that area, not necessarily just between Lougheed and Dewdney, but also the areas north of Dewdney and south of Lougheed as well. So that's something that's been rattling around in my mind. That's it for me, Chair.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm looking around one last time. I'm not seeing any further discussion. So there is a motion on the table. One is that that staff continue to review the Lougheed Transit Corridor Area Plan as outlined in this report, and also that we proceed with option 1, which is going out to get that high level, as Mr. Hartman explained, that high level, what does the community want piece before we move into too much more detail. So it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that motion? I'm not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much to staff. I don't know if everyone from the community joining us can see we have a full house of a very, very dedicated and talented team working on this big piece of work for our community that has joined us this morning. So thank you all for being here to